Recording. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this Let's Code Together webinar. My name's Jane Knight and I'm a clinical associate at the MSSO, and I'm also joined, I'll give you a wave, I'm also joined today by my colleague, Dr. Caroline Wilson, who's one of our medical officers. So together
hello.
Hello.
Also welcome from my side.
Thank you, Caroline. So yes, so let's see, go to the next slide. The first slide just explains what MEDRA started in the mid-1990s. It was part of an ICH initiative. The MSSO was put in place to maintain and distribute MEDRA, and the activities of the MSSO are overseen by a management committee with representatives from the 3 ICH regions. This is both the regulatory authorities and the industry. This next slide is a copyright notice that says that MEDRA is owned by ICH, and so is the material you'll see today. If you use any of the material in any of your follow-up discussions, you must acknowledge ICH as owners of MEDRA and the material. So during the pandemic, we've been running a lot more webinars. You've probably seen this if you've been to some of our other sessions. And when we ask for feedback, repeatedly attendees ask us for more practical coding examples and especially more complex terms for coding. So we've listened to your feedback and we've come up with this new idea. We're calling it Let's Code Together, and we're running 2 pilot sessions. This is the first of these sessions. So you're helping us. We're all part of the pilot together. The big change is that we've tried to make it interactive learning, make it into a workshop format, and as such, we're very keen for your feedback. There will be a survey at the end of the session online that you can fill out, so please tell us what you think of it so that we can ensure we're always meeting user needs. Our plan is to offer monthly sessions like this with new examples each month. That's also something different. Each Let's Code Together session will have new examples in it. And one of our ideas is in the new year, we will use some of the sessions to focus on specific challenging topics that have been suggested by users in the past. So let's get ready to participate. One of the things we're going to do, which is vital to your participation, is being able to log on to an application called Poll Everywhere. You can do this with your internet browser on your computer or with your cell phone. What you need to do is to type in pollev.com into your URL field of your browser. So it's not a search engine, it's a browser. Type it in at the top. You'll then see the Poll Everywhere screen, and you need to enter my name as the username. This poll is completely anonymous. We're not tracking your responses. So you need to type in JaneKnight855. That's the username, and then click join. So I'll do this while we speak, and then we'll make sure we've allowed enough time for everyone. pollev.com, that's at the top. Then JaneKnight855, all one word. JaneKnight855, join, and we should all be then linked to the presentation. That will enable you to join our quizzes. We're also going to use the questions panel in the GoToWebinar software. This will allow you to ask questions and comment on the examples presented. So please do ask questions as we go along. Sometimes it may be that we get into some discussion on the chat and we may not all agree on the term selection. We've chosen terms which maybe are not always black and white. And so it may be that in the interests of time, we have to agree to or disagree. So please, let's, if we all accept that at the beginning. The other ground rule is that we cannot take requests to code specific verbatim terms via chat questions. So please don't send us the question, how do you code this term? Because we will not be able to do that during the session. Caroline and I are on our own, so please bear with us. We may not get round to everybody's question today. And to make it interactive, this is why we've limited the attendance at this webinar compared to what we usually have on our other webinars. At the end, as I mentioned, there will be a survey. If you have any burning top examples or topics, you can put it in the survey. We will have a look and we will consider your suggestions. We can't guarantee that we can include your examples next time. But the other thing is that your examples, suggestions must be of general interest to the wider audience. So let's test the polling now. Can you tell us where are you in the world? Where are you in the world? And this is where I refer to Carol Ann, who's my expert on geography.
So it's mainly Europe, South Korea.
Mainly Europe, South Korea. India.
Southeast Asia. I see Balkan countries, Italy.
Where are our Chinese? Spain. Where are our ladies in China
Russia.
that I saw on the list? Russia. Oh, yes. Thank you, Carla. Lots of people in Europe. So welcome wherever you are in the world. Oh, somebody in Africa, unless it was a missed, you can correct it.
China.
China, thank you. Good. So let's move on. So the other way of making it interactive, if you don't have access to a browser, we've set up a demonstration password for you. So if you want, I'm not going to explain how to do it because I'm assuming everyone's got enough background to be able to go to the Medra website, click on the right-hand side, there's a WBB link there, a quick link you can use, and you can log on with the username of training and the password that's on your screen. So if you don't have access to a browser and you want one, you can use this. If you have your own browser, that's fine. Stick with your own browser. Okay, is everyone? I'll leave that one up for a minute. Just that perhaps you can take a snapshot of it, screenshot if you need it. Okay. So challenging is in coding. Well, Carol Ann and I have been coding for many, many years. And we come across terms where we have challenges in coding them. Sometimes you find when you look in Medra, there's not always an exact match, or sometimes there's more than one possible approach to handling a term. Even the points to consider document gives us possible options in some places. And sometimes what we find, and this was something we found even when preparing for the session, is that when we each look at a term, we understand that term differently. We read it differently. So what we need to do when we do code is sometimes when you have these challenges, you have to find what we say is the closest LLT. That LLT mustn't interpret or mustn't assume, but it may be less specific. And this is what we have been calling a best approximation, if you like to call it that. But overall, the rule still stands that we must always code as reported without any assumptions. And when I say it's like this is how I sometimes feel coding is. What do you see when you look at this picture? Do you see a rock formation above a lake? Or if you turn your head to the side, do you see what looks like a mother and child standing in the water? Do you see that? And who's to say which is right? Am I right if I see the rocks? Or are you right if you see the people? And what about this one? Generally, I think most people would see a horse's head when you look at that. But again, if you tip your head to the side, who's to say what's right and wrong? Is it a frog on a lily pad or is it a horse? And sometimes coding is just like that. And what it needs, we need to apply medical judgment, and we need a balance between the consistency rules, which give us coding rules, which give us consistency, and medical judgment, which is what we use to manage the risks to the patients. It's not robotic. Coding is not robotic. Medical references are helpful, and that's something we'll highlight as we go through the session today. And sometimes it's also necessary to request a new term if you absolutely can't find the concept in any way captured in Medra. So these are some of the points we wanted to make clear to you at the beginning. And then let's get going. Let's code together. So we'll take our first example, unsteady on feet. Well, when you see this term, the questions that go through my mind, is it clear? Is it clear enough to code? What is actually being reported? Do we know? Do we have a diagnosis? Well, not really. We have what seems to be an observation that the patient's unsteady. We know that they're standing up because they're on their feet, but do we need to ask clarification on this? Some of you might say, well, I'd like to code that. I'd like to query that. And that's fine if that's what you would choose to do. It may be that there isn't a diagnosis available, and that's why this is the first. We've just noticed that the doctor may have just noticed that or consumer that the patient is unsteady. So use your browser, use your polling software. What do you think is the best LLT for that term? Give you a minute. And then we'll see how what we all think, and I'll use the browser myself to show you how I would search. Unavailable event. Oh, gait unsteady. Unsteady gait. Unsteadiness. Code to unsteadiness. Few of you said that. So, we're jumping around. Unsteadiness, unsteady gait. Jane Knight 855. I think you're already on. Whoever entered that one, you're already on the browser. So you can enter again now. Try again and send us a term. COVID-19. Unsteady gait. Unsteady. Well, you can see there we're getting a few coming in. So we can see we are getting some commonality. Unsteadiness is coming up a lot. Although somebody said they weren't happy and they would go for an unavailable event, which is the term we use when we're not sure what's really happening. So let's browse Medra. So here's my browser. Now, if I was to come to this, just like some of you have done, I would start with the words we've been given, and I'll start with unstead. I won't type in unsteady because, as we saw with the suggestions that the group gave us, it could be unsteadiness or unsteady. So let's just start with that and see what we get. And then we get our options here, gait unsteady and unsteadiness, the three that you gave me. So let's have a look at those. Let's have a look at the hierarchy of these. A gait disturbance, and I can see on the right-hand side here about that term, it's primary to the general disorders, and unsteadiness is a balance disorder. Both the gait join, of course, at the PT. Balance disorder is primary to nervous system. So which of these are we going to have then? Gait disturbance or balance disorder? So let's go back to our slides. I would be looking at one or other of those. Of course, we could do a right-hand click and come to the browser. But in the interest of time, let's go back to our slides. Let's have another poll. What do you think? You're already there ahead of me. We've identified between us, all of us, we've identified two possibles, or if you still want to query, let us know. Unsteadiness seems to be the one that's the predominant choice. And I would agree with you. Unsteadiness is better. That's what we've been told. The person's unsteady when they're standing. Gait would tell us that they're walking. We don't know the person is walking. They may have just stood up out the chair and they feel unsteady. So although we can't interpret any cause for this, we would code to what we've been reported as unsteadiness. So our learning points there are to use the word stems, code as reported, don't assume anything, don't interpret, don't add any information. So thank you. And we'll see if we've got any questions on that at the moment. No, nothing that I can see.
No question.
No questions or comments. That was a nice, easy one to get us started. Now for the hard ones, I'm going to hand over to Caroline. Let me see, make you presenter, Caroline. There we are.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So hello again and welcome everybody. Let's have a look at the next example now. Here we have a chest pain that occurred after a coughing episode. Now let us look at this verbatim. Is it clear or is it ambiguous? Well, it is clear and precise. And what is reported here? So it's a combination term we see. It contains two informations, so chest pain and a coughing episode. And it has a time-wise relationship because the chest pain occurs after the coughing episode. The question is whether we would find a combination term that would cover both, or whether we would need to split and code both events separately. So how would you approach the scenario? How would you handle this report? So how would you handle? Would you split? Would you query? Would you try to find a combination term? Yes, yeah, query. So we have different opinions here. Two terms. Yes, it's two separate events. Split. Okay, so let's look into the browser. Let me check the browser here. I will log in again. Here we are. So let's try to find a combination term first and enter pain and cough. Quite improbable that we will find something, but just try. We find a term, we get a hit, it's painful cough, painful cough, but this is not what has been reported. So we have a chest pain after a cough episode. So we didn't find a suitable term. Now let's try with post and cough and search. No search results. What we would now do is to exchange the cough with a medical term or synonym. And in Latin, cough is called tussis. So let's look for post-tus, always using word stems. And here I have post-tussive vomiting. So there are some terms that combine cough with other medical condition, and it's even represented on PT level, as you can see here. But we don't have a post-tussive pain and, of course, not a chest pain. So you're right, we would need to split this term. Now let's first look into the chest pain. We have the chest pain. If we search for chest pain, we will find a direct match in MedDRA, a lexical variant, so just a different word order, and then some search results that contain our search strings, chest and pain, plus additional information. And you see that we have different chest pains that we can choose from. And they are all also represented in different PTs, like chest pain cardiac, angina pectoris, or the chest pain non-cardiac. Again, a separate PT, non-cardiac chest pain, whereas the chest pain itself is just grouped under chest pain. And if you can look into the hierarchy here. So chest pain has a primary SOC in general with secondary linkages to cardiac and respiratory. And of course, the angina pectoris one has primary SOC cardiac. So they are different medical concepts, and they are represented in different system organ classes. So could we assume that our chest pain is a cardiac pain?
No,
we can't.
Coughing.
We can't assume that it is. It could, of course, be that it's a patient with a pre-existing heart disease and that the coughing episode was very hard and exhausting. So such a patient could suffer cardiac pain, but we don't know that. We don't know whether the patient had pre-existing cardiac disease. So could we assume it's musculoskeletal chest pain because of the coughing episode? Again, we can't, because as I said before, it could be that it's cardiac. So we cannot assume anything. We cannot say it's non-cardiac. We cannot say it's cardiac or musculoskeletal chest pain. The best match here would really be chest pain. Now we are coming to our coughing episode. First, we would try to enter our search strings here and try if we find a hit for a coughing episode. No search results, so then we would look for cough. And of course, we would find something here. We have it, right mouse click, go to browser, and we would see this LLT in the hierarchy and could search for other LLTs under PT cough that may be suitable for our reported event. But we have dry cough, irritative cough, nocturnal cough, nothing that would represent an episode. So the best match here, we had a reported coughing episode, would be coughing. So this is how you would approach this, this coding scenario. you would split into chest pain, not making any assumptions, and code the coughing separately. What we could see is that we should first look for a suitable combination term, replacing the original wording by synonyms or medical terms. And if no such term is available, we would split and code each event separately. And when doing so, no assumption should be made. Remember the basic MedRA coding rule that Jane has already mentioned. Code as reported. So do not interpret, do not add, and also do not subtract, do not omit relevant medical information. Here the next example. The next example also represents a combination term. So here, this patient again suffered chest pain. Then he went to a general practitioner, and he was then diagnosed to have suffered a muscle strain. It is again a clear and precise verbatim. It's not ambiguous. But what is being reported in this instance here? These are not two signs and symptoms as we had before. But what we have here is the symptom, that is the chest pain, and then a diagnosis, that is the muscle strain. So do you know how to handle such terms? Where could you find guidance? Do you know? You have some options out of the PTC guideline for MedRA term selection. So where would you look for guidance for this verbatim? We have conflicting information, when to split, event reported with pre-existing condition. And I see that most of you have already chosen the correct answer here. We have a diagnosis and a symptom here in our case. So let me switch screens now and show you directly in the document. So what we have here is our term selection points to consider document. And if I then choose the diagnosis, signs and symptom section, here we have it. You are told if a diagnosis and its characteristic signs or symptoms are reported, select a term for the diagnosis. A MedRA combination term is not needed in this instance. So no splitting, no combination term needed. So if you have a chest pain due to myocardial infarction, you would just code the myocardial infarction. So this is the guidance that is provided in the document. So with all this information, how would you finally code this verbatim, taking into account the guidance of the PTC document? So what was the diagnosis in this instance? So the general practitioner diagnosed a muscle strain based on the symptom that the patient suffered, that was chest pain. So the symptom would be chest pain, but the diagnosis would be muscle strain. So, and based on the PTC document, it would be sufficient to just code the diagnosis, muscle strain. If you would split, you would of course think, well, if I have a muscle strain and then suffer chest pain, it would not just be chest pain, but because the underlying condition is a muscle strain, it would rather be musculoskeletal chest pain. You are right here. But this is a symptom. When following the PTC document, you would need to code to muscle strain, because this term really represents the diagnosis that was given by the general practitioner here.
That would be an alternative approach though, Caroline, wouldn't it? Some companies do that to code the signs and symptoms as well. They do adopt the alternate approach.
Yes, they do. So, and also we have an alternative approach that is provided in the PTC guidance document. So this is really the preferred approach that is provided. You also have the option to, of course, split, but you always have to wait it's more easy. You can then code everything. You don't have to think about whether something is characteristic for a given diagnosis. And you can just split, but you would then have more, so to say, noise in your database. It would make data retrieval a little more complicated, more complex. So with coding to the diagnosis only, you would have a leaner information in your database. Data retrieval may be more easy then. But we are coming to another example later on that will show you that this may not be so easy to consider what is a typical sign and symptom for a given diagnosis.
So that's a really good point, Caroline. We've got a comment or question at this point from somebody is saying, would you consider chest pain to be a typical symptom of muscle strain? They're saying, well, you wouldn't necessarily always expect chest pain to be a muscle strain. Had you considered that?
Yeah, of course, because it's reported together. Muscle strain diagnosed by GP after complaining of chest pain. So the patient went to the general practitioner with the chest pain, and then the general practitioner diagnosed a muscle strain. So this is connected. And that's why, for me, it's quite obvious that we are talking about a musculoskeletal chest pain. So a myalgia on the rib cage based on this or due to this muscle strain.
Thank you.
So what did we do? First, we looked at the verbatim to get a clear understanding of what is being reported here. We have a diagnosis, muscle strain, and a related symptom, that is chest pain. And in this example, for me, it's quite obvious that the chest pain is a symptom of the muscle strain because the symptom was the basis for the diagnosis of the general practitioner. So the symptom is a muscular pain of the rib cage. But as I mentioned already, when dealing with this type of verbatim, be careful because you will always have to clearly distinguish the signs and symptoms of a given diagnosis from subsequent complications or sequela. So let me illustrate this with an example. If you have a reported diagnosis like, for example, feverish gastrointestinal infection with vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal cramps, of course, the fever, the diarrhea, the vomiting, the abdominal cramps would represent typical signs and symptoms of the GI infection. But what if the patient then suffers hypotension and somnolence? Would these still be typical signs and symptoms of a GI infection? No, in my view, of course, these would rather represent subsequent complications because of a dehydration and would need to be coded separately.
Yeah.
And I think you had an example.
Yes, I had a very similar example to that I came across. It was one that was raised by a regulator. I think it was like an inspection finding it was, or feedback, but it was that the patient had been vomiting. They became dehydrated, collapsed, went into a coma. I think there were an underlying, it was diabetes, I think, underlying it, and they eventually died. And what had happened was the person coded it just with the initial event of vomiting, because that's what they thought was related to the drug, their vomiting. And then they missed out all the things in between, and they had an outcome of death, which looked very strange when you give that into a regulatory authority. So this is why we say you need to code everything we say, don't miss things out. So make sure that you capture the complications or sequelae, as Caroline says there. So yeah, another example.
Okay, are there any more?
No, there's let me have a look. I didn't think so. Somebody's gone back to the muscle strain, and they'd say, I would be afraid that if I only choose the LLT muscle strain, we miss information on the site around the rib cage or the chest. So with the muscle strain, they still feel that they personally would like to capture the chest pain as well, to capture the site of where the muscle strain was and the pain.
Of course, you could do so. You could decide, as the PTC document already. I've mentioned that the PTC document allows to do so, to also capture the symptoms. But then you will have to make sure when splitting this and coding these events separately, so the diagnosis plus the symptom, then you would make sure that you just do not code chest pain only, but really musculoskeletal chest pain, because these two are interrelated. They are related. Yeah, but often when you look into MedDRA, you will see that the actual site of a condition is just only represented on LLT level. So that's another thing. In this instance, of course, it's not as such, so you won't find any muscle strain of the chest or so. That would, of course, be ideal if you would have an LLT that would capture the rib cage for the muscle strain, but this is not available. So muscle strain would be the only option to code the diagnosis only. If for any reason the symptom is relevant based on product-specific consideration, of course, you can always split this information.
Thank you.
Now the next one. Again, we have a combination term here, atrial fibrillation triggered by Graves' thyrotoxicosis. But it's a more complex one. It seems to be easy, but it's a more complex one. The information is clear. The patient suffers Graves' thyrotoxicosis, and the hyperthyroidism then triggers atrial fibrillation. Also, in this instance, we have a diagnosis and a symptom. But is it typical? Is it characteristic for the given diagnosis? Can the atrial fibrillation be subsumed under Graves' thyrotoxicosis? Is there maybe a combination term, or do we need to split? Is there guidance one could use? Actually, there is some more guidance that is provided in the PTC document in chapter 3.1, and you can see it on the slide. In our example, we had a definite diagnosis with a symptom. So we had the definite diagnosis, Graves' thyrotoxicosis, and the symptom that was atrial fibrillation. And what the guidance tells us, preferred option is code diagnosis only. The alternative option that you can also choose is to code the diagnosis and all characteristic typical signs and symptoms. But the guidance also tells us that all signs and symptoms that are not typical, that are not characteristic for the given diagnosis, need to be captured and coded separately. And also an example is provided here. So here we have the example. It's quite straightforward. If you have a myocardial infarction with chest pain, dyspnea, diaphoresis, ECG changes reported, and the jaundice, of course, the jaundice does not match the diagnosis, so the jaundice would have to be coded separately. But this is really straightforward, very clear. And in coding practice, it may not be so clear in all instances. So in real life, it may be really more difficult to take this decision, whether a given sign or symptom is really typical for a given diagnosis. So what you can do then is to refer to medical textbooks, dictionaries, etc. So here we have two references. One is Dorlins. And Dorlins mentions, when talking about the characteristics of hyperthyroidism, that the characteristics are tachycardia, also palpitations, but also mentions the atrial fibrillation. In another reference, here we have the tachycardia, we have the palpitations, but no mentioning of the atrial fibrillation. So also the references that you use may not really make clear the background and may not be very helpful to really decide whether a given symptom is really characteristic for the given diagnosis. So what would you decide now? Can atrial fibrillation be considered a typical symptom of Graves' thyrotoxicosis?
I think,
What do you
Caroline,
think?
that shows as well the benefit of having standard references that you use in your group. You have recognized references, doesn't it? Not just grabbing something off the internet.
Yes. This is always really helpful to have standard references for such cases. So let's say Dorland's or Harrison's, also for abbreviations, dictionary for medical abbreviations, or also for lab values, for normal ranges in order to appropriately classify lab values that are reported.
Yes.
So most of you think that atrial fibrillation cannot be considered a typical symptom of Graves' thyrotoxicosis. Yes, I digged into this topic a little further, and I could find out that atrial fibrillation is rather a symptom of hyperthyroidism in elderly patients, and that this may be related to pre-existing cardiac disease in many of them. So this may rather indicate a complication than a typical characteristic symptom. And what is a typical, when would you consider something as a typical symptom? When 30% of the patients are affected by the symptom, or 50 or 80? So somehow we have a gray area here.
I think that also, Caroline, makes me think it's always good to have a medic if you can. If you don't have I don't have your medical background, and I think it's good when coding like that, if you do get stuck with tricky terms, it's always good to have somebody you can go to help.
Yes, that's definitely the case. So you would need a medic that also has a good MedRA background, because otherwise, if you don't ask somebody who really understands the importance of coding consistency, following the PTC guidance, etc., you may get very different approaches or very different answers that may not be helpful. So it would really be helpful to have a medic in the coding organization, or somebody who is really very familiar with the meta terminology, the coding conventions, the guidance that is provided by ICH to provide advice here.
Thank you.
So we all know that medicine is not an exact, precise science. We saw it. So we get different information from different textbooks. So even when using medical reference, you may not get a clear picture. If you are not sure, take a conservative approach and split. This would be my recommendation. And again, always make a clear distinction between diagnosis and its typical signs and symptoms, and related complications, related sequelae. And with this, do we have questions? Not that I don't see any.
No questions on that one.
With this, I hand over to you again, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you. So hopefully you can see my screen. Thank you for that, Caroline. So we'll move to our next example, dilated aortic arch. Now, whenever I see these terms with dilated, dilated, dilation, my heart sinks, because I think, oh, what do they mean? What does this mean? Is this clear enough? Dilated aortic arch, what is actually being reported here? Because I think, is it a medical condition that something's become enlarged, dilated, or is it that it's a procedure? And this is where the reporting I find often confusing. Is it a procedure or is it a medical condition? So let's have a look at a picture of the aorta to see exactly where the arch is. Can we even look at because when we're looking in MedRA, it might help to know if it's part of the descending or ascending aorta, but actually it's the arch. So it's between the two. We can't make any assumption there on site, but there it is. So then it comes to a bit like Caroline was saying, is it likely that this is a procedure? Would you ever have a procedure to expand or dilate that area of the aorta? So let's go to MedRA and have a look and see what we've got in here. So I'll start with the words we've got. Aort, again, using a stem, and dilate. I won't put the whole word in because then it will give me more results. So let's have a look and see what Medra has. We've got aortic dilatation, ascending aortic dilatation. So let's have a look at the hierarchy of this term. Dilatation, it's seen as a disorder. It's in the vascular disorders SOC. So dilatation there is taken as being a disorder, but is that the same as my dilation? False luminal. So that I'm not sure. Aortic dilatation, it's something I could maybe keep as an option, but I'm not sure. What else might it be? Aortic. What if it was a procedure? I'm going to limit my search to the procedures and see what I can find about aortic dilatation. If it was a procedure. Coarctation repair. Aortic aneurysm repair. Well, we don't know that. We don't know anything about it. Aortic surgery. No, not really there. So what about as a procedure? What about looking at dilation on its own? See what else comes up. It's a bit of a I feel like I'm a bit randomly looking really today. Vasodilation procedure. So if it was a stretching of that area of the aorta, perhaps a vasodilation procedure, let's go and we could have a look at the browser and see what's right if it was a procedure. But would you do a procedure on that area? I feel like I need to have do some more research. So let's go back. I've had a look at a few. What would you, of those we've seen, what would you go for? Aortic repair, aortic dilatation, which we saw reported was a condition, aortogram arch abnormal, which would be a lab finding in the investigation SOC showing that there's a problem, or the vasodilation procedure. Well, all of you are going for aortic dilatation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you if I was put in this situation, what would I look for? Some research. So let's go to our next slide. I'm not sure all of you have indicated they participated in that poll. Let's have a look. One of the things that's always worth looking at with the dilatation as a reminder is to look in the Medra introductory guide because, and this is where I'm going to go to my browser now and I'm going to show you this live so you can see where to find it. How to use support documentation from the website, if you're not familiar, and then under the actual version we're using now, I can look at the introductory guide for Medra 23.1. This is a document that doesn't get quoted quite as much as the points to consider, but it is very useful because it has some rules around the structure of Medra. We have a couple of sections. We have a section which talks about body sites and how Medra classifies body sites, 4.8, if I come down to 4.8. And then it has another section with individual terms and how those terms can be used. So where am I? 4.8 is a useful section to be aware of. You can always look up what's considered to be the abdominal wall, the chest wall, the pharynx, the ear. What is the pinna of the ear? So this is a section I would recommend you become familiar with. But also the one I'm looking for today is 5.1, is general word usage. And we have a whole section there on dilation and dilatation. But remember, this is telling us how Medra terms are classified. It's not telling us how to read our reported events. Dilation and dilatation. Some people say, some references say these are synonyms, but we need some structure because we're working in an organized systematic terminology. So for purpose of distinction in Medra, dilation is considered a procedure and the term dilatation is the disorder. Well, that's why we're seeing the aortic dilatation in the vascular SOC. Now, my report was dilation, but that's not, I'm still not convinced because would you ever actually stretch that area of the arch? Might it be that they mean dilatation? So let's do some more medical references on this and see. And I did that before we joined together today to save time. And actually, I found that I couldn't find a single reference talking about a procedure to dilate the aortic arch. So at this point, I'm looking at it thinking this is actually aortic dilatation. I agree with you, those of you who voted, and I would code that one. If I was unsure, you've always got the option to query, but we don't want to be querying unnecessarily. It would depend also on what the term, how important it was within the context of the study, I suppose, in a way. Is it an adverse event is necessary? Then I certainly would want to make sure I understood exactly what was going on. But I would want to be clear of the anatomical site, understand what's being reported and how confident I am in my understanding, referring to the introductory guide as I've showed you, applying medical judgment and using word stems again, the old one that we've shown you a few times now, that popular one. So dilated aortic arch, I would be inclined to code towards the aortic dilatation as the procedure. So even though the guidance explains how the MEDRA terms are classified, I think my reporter means dilatation. Okay, and I'm looking to see if we've got no comments on that one so far.
No.
So the next example, is this term clear? Bulging disc. What's being reported here? Do we know what part of the body is affected, and do we have a suitable LLT? So what do you think? It's a chance for you to have a go. What do you think? Nobody's playing with this one. What do you think? Would you code that one? What part of the body is it? A disc prolapse. You would code it. Hernia, herniated disc perhaps. A spinal disc, I guess, if you're talking about prolapse. Code it. You'd code it. You'd query it. Spine, vertebral disc. Predominantly, you seem to be saying it's a vertebral disc. Is that the only understanding? Are there any other discs in the body? You'd query. Well, some of you are saying you'd query. Presumably that is because you think it could be another site. So let's have a look. Is it the spine or is it in the eye? Is it a way of describing papilledema or problems around the optic nerve and the disc in there? So is it this optic disc or is it the spine? And we can't really be sure. Again, I personally, I would query this one. And it's because I'm not sure of the anatomical site. And that might be something that I'd have a standard query for. You were saying, Caroline, before when we were practicing, you were saying that how you believe that standard queries are important for efficiency.
Yes. I think standard queries, we had them in my previous company, because usually if you don't have standard templates, standard text for the most frequent scenarios for queries, like combination terms, ambiguous terms, vague terms, like only an infarction reported, for example, or misspellings and foreign text sometimes. So all these are scenarios that you encounter quite frequently. And it's really useful to have standard text for these. It helps coders, because some coders may be very experienced and really raise queries that are clear, so that investigators or other reporters really know what they are supposed to do, what is really the issue here. But others may not be as experienced, and then it comes to re-queries, etc., etc. And this may annoy people, so reporters, also investigators, study nurses. So that's why our experience was previously that our coders found this really helpful, and it really decreased the number of re-queries that we had to send.
That's good, thank you. It's interesting. We might spend some more time in some of our future sessions looking at terms that need querying and why and how we query them, what we would need to make them clear. sometimes you can't get any information and you end up having to find a non-specific term in MEDRA. And there's guidance on that in the points to consider chapter 3.4. And the two events that I know I commonly use would be ill-defined disorder or unevaluable event. Somebody suggested unevaluable event for one of our previous examples. And I would use that ill-defined disorder if I knew there was a problem within the patient, or if it was something that I didn't know and it could potentially be a product issue, product quality issue, then I would choose it unevaluable event. Here, I don't know about you, Caroline, I think I'd go ill-defined disorder on this one. So we have had a question. Somebody's asking me about the introductory guide and the definitions, or not definitions, but classification conventions there. How do they differ from the concept descriptions? Well, they are different. You find different things in the introductory guide. The introductory guide talks about the structure of MEDRA and the principles that are used by our team of physicians when they add terms to MEDRA, and when the MEDRA was originally designed and structured. So that's where you get the idea about the sites, what body site, what part of what sock you'd expect certain body sites to be included in. The concept descriptions talk more about terms which are included, words that are included in some of the MEDRA terms that people might want help to understand better. So they are descriptions in that way, not definitions as such. So this is the difference. Some are overarching rules in the introductory guide around the structure of MEDRA, and the concept descriptions are more around concepts that are included within some of the MEDRA terms. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Caroline, for you to do the next example. I'm just having a look at time. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
You see my screen, Jane?
Yep. Yeah, can see your screen.
Okay. So now let us have a look at the next coding scenario. Here we have anxiety and depression secondary to MVA. So 3 events are reported here: anxiety, depression, and the MVA. The first thing that we will have to ask ourselves when looking at the abbreviation is whether it is unambiguous. So what do you think? How would you handle MVA? Would you query to seek clarification from the reporter immediately? Or would you find the meaning of MVA and use medical judgment in context of what has been reported in addition? Would you directly code to LLT, motor vehicle accident, or would you code to unavailable event? So we have split opinions here. Some would find the meaning in the textbook for abbreviations, medical abbreviations, and use medical judgment. One would always query, others would directly code to motor vehicle accident. So MVA may stand for the motor vehicle accident, but also for malignant ventricular arrhythmia, for mitral valve annuloplasty, or also for mechanical ventricular assistance. Now let us apply medical judgment here. Our verbatim was anxiety and depression secondary to MVA. Now, anxiety and depression rather lead to arrhythmia, not vice versa. And could it be that anxiety and depression after a mitral valve annuloplasty? Well, the patient must have suffered mitral valve insufficiency and has now undergone surgery to repair it. We are not told that there were complications or that the surgery was unsuccessful. So why would the patient then suffer anxiety and depression after the surgery? And patients needing mechanical ventricular assistance suffer end-stage cardiac failure and rather suffer anxiety and depression before undergoing this treatment because of their underlying disease. So not because of the surgery. So in my view, MVA most probably stands for motor vehicle accident here. So the driver may have seriously injured another person in the accident, or may have suffered severe injuries himself, or may have damaged many cars and now has severe financial problems, etc. So this all could, of course, lead to anxiety and depression. For me, as I said, it would be okay to interpret MVA as motor vehicle accident in this instance, but one may also take a more conservative approach and query for clarification. But as Jane already mentioned, you need to consider that in drug safety departments, the possibility of raising queries is often limited. And in clinical trials, you will always try to keep the numbers of coding queries low and only query when really necessary to not annoy investigators or study nurses. So you always have to find a balance here.
There's a balance.
So I would interpret MVA as motor vehicle accident. The additional events that are reported in the verbatim are anxiety and depression. So they are clear and straightforward. So let us look what we can do with these two terms. So conditions. Let us look for a combination term and look for anxiety. Oops, I have to delete my cuff first. Anxiety and depression. Again, word stems and search. And we have a perfect match here that really combines what has been reported, anxiety, depression. And if I click on it and say go to browser, again, I'm in psychiatric disorders now, and I see that the LRT, anxiety, depression, is grouped under depression. So the information depression takes priority over the anxiety, because anxiety disorders are grouped in a separate HLGT. So anxiety depression is grouped under depression. And we could, of course, now stop our activities and say, well, let's take the anxiety depression and we are done. But again, look at your verbatim. What we are told is that the anxiety and the depression are a result of the MVA. So somehow a reaction to the MVA. And if I now look for a term that would include depression, because the anxiety depression is grouped under depression, and something like reactive or reaction, and search, I would find something. I would find depression reactive. So let's look again, right click, right hand mouse click, go to browser. We are still in psychiatric disorders. And here we are now in a different HLGT that is called adjustment disorders. And the depression reactive is grouped under adjustment disorder with depressed mood. So because it's because the patient suffered these conditions as a reaction to the MVA, he couldn't cope with the situation. Also, you can have this when you lose family members due to a divorce, etc. So it's an adjustment disorder to either psychological or physical trauma. Now, again, you could say, I'm done, depression reactive, that's it. But look at the neighbors. Always look at the neighbors if you find a better term. So here we have a general term, adjustment disorder. We have one that really includes anxiety only, adjustment disorder with anxiety. Yes. Then we have adjustment disorder with disturbance of conduct. And here we have one, adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. So this really then perfectly captures the adjustment disorder plus the two symptoms, the conditions that were reported for this patient. So this is a perfect match to what has been reported here. Adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. So why is the depression reactive be considered an adjustment disorder? So this is not a definition by MEDRA, but this is of course based on standard accurate standard classification. In this instance, it's DSM-5. So DSM standing for, I have to read it because I always forget it, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. And this guidance there really says that all reactive depressions, they are just transient. They cannot be considered true depression. That's why they're grouped under depressed mood here and have to be considered adjustment disorders.
I think that's good to point out, Caroline. That's really clever. I love the way you look at the neighbours and you find a better one, because we would have missed that. Some people would be I think some people are sometimes afraid when they see something like that, an adjustment disorder at the PT, they think, oh, I'm not sure about that. I've been told to check the hierarchy, and can I make that? Am I making a diagnosis there by choosing that LLT? But what you're saying is it's just the way it's classified, isn't it? And we're not interpreting or diagnosing. That is okay to do.
No, all the classifications that you can find in MEDRA are based on, they are really reconciled with experts in this area. So it's not just the MSSO taking the decisions. So here in this instance, it's really based on the new DSM-5 guidance and classifications for depressions.
So we've got a couple of questions, Carol. I know we're getting short of time and some people might need to leave. So we've just got a couple of comments really from people saying that they feel and they feel that MVA, they would like to look more in the case to make sure that it's supported by the case, or to do the research to check out and not make any assumption about what MVA stands for. And that's good. And I'm pleased to see that our audience, our coders are being cautious. It's better to be cautious, isn't it?
Yeah.
But they're that's just the comments we're getting.
Yes. So as I said, you can take the conservative approach as well. Be fully sure that this really relates to a motor vehicle accident and raise a query. But what do we do if you cannot raise a query in drug safety, for example?
Yeah.
Then you have to decide whether you make it a motor vehicle accident or whether you just make it an unavailable event. But then it will be really difficult to then, based on the coding, the coding output, to then come to the adjustment disorder, because the adjustment disorder really connects the accident to the anxiety and depression. You could, of course, because you even don't know whether it was an accident, if you would not consider this a motor vehicle accident, it could, as I said before, it could just be an arrhythmia.
Thank you, Caroline.
Okay, so what could we see from this example? Just in summary, first of all reported events should be coded, including the injuries and accidents, because accidents and also falls may indicate medical problems. Like vision disturbances, balance problems, seizures, etc., etc. If confronted with abbreviations, make sure that they are clear and unambiguous, but put the abbreviation in context of what has been reported and apply medical judgment when taking your decision, whether to query or not, and use the MEDRA hierarchy when facing more complex coding scenarios in order to prioritize the information. We saw that in our example, anxiety depression was grouped under PT depression, so depression took priority over anxiety. And when searching for suitable terms, do bottom-up and top-down searches. Look for neighbors in order to find the most accurate term, as shown before. And now I will give back to Jane.
Thank you, Caroline. Well, I think I'm sad to say we've reached the end of our hour. We said we would do this for an hour, but I know I've really enjoyed myself and we've not got through all our examples. So hopefully everyone will say it's good and we can come back and do it again. But I think we've, as we said at the beginning, this is a pilot. And so please do give us your feedback now. There's a survey on the screen. If you're using the poll everywhere, you'll also get an email tomorrow confirming that you are here today. You can use that for your training records if you want, and you can reply to us through that email, respond and give us feedback if you want to write more details. So please do. We're interested. There's about 40 of you online today because we did limit the session. So we'd love to see you again at a future event. If you do sign up in future and you know you can't make it, please do cancel. That's the only thing I would say, because seats are limited and we've had a number of people not showing today. But it's been great spending the time with you, and we've really appreciated your input. That's what makes this session work, is your input. So thank you for that. Thank you, Carol-Ann, for your support, for your wonderful examples you've shown us today.
Thank you, Jane.
It's been
it
fun.
was a joint effort.
It's been fun. So is there anything else? We just let people fill out their forms. Is there anything else we need to share with the group? Anything
Nothing
else
from my side. So hope to see you again next time.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, wherever you are, and stay safe, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.